They assumed marrying their mother automatically made them heirs to my company. They even started telling employees they'd be in charge soon. What they didn't know, I had already drafted a succession plan that leaves them with absolutely nothing. I'm 54M. 7 years ago, I remarried after spending most of my 40s clawing my way out of financial disaster that almost erased me. I had a business partner back then who mismanaged contracts and buried us in obligations I didn't even know we had. When it collapsed, I had to liquidate nearly everything and start over. I built my current logistics company from nothing but a rented warehouse space and 2 employees who took a gamble on me. Now it's stable, not flashy, not some tech unicorn, but consistent. We handle regional freight contracts for mid-sized manufacturers, predictable margins, real assets. Most of my net worth is tied up in that company along with a house and investments I made once things stabilized. I never had kids of my own. I assumed I would at some point, but life didn't work that way. When I married my wife, she had 2 adult children already in their 30s. They were polite when we met, distant but civil. They had careers, their own lives, their own circles. I wasn't stepping into a father role. I was stepping into mom's husband who runs a company. For years, my will left everything to them equally. It was simple, clean. It kept the peace. I didn't overthink it. I told myself that since I didn't have biological children, this was the practical choice. Last year, my younger sister died without warning. No drawn-out illness. No time to prepare. We had argued about something trivial on the phone a week before. I remember hanging up irritated. Then I got a call from one of her neighbors saying she'd been taken to the hospital and didn't make it. I handled everything. Paperwork, accounts, storage units. I discovered quickly that she'd been holding up more weight than anyone realized. She left behind 2 sons in their 20s. They weren't irresponsible in some cartoonish way. They were just barely afloat. One had left school years ago to work extra shifts when my sister's health dipped. The other drifted between contract work that never stuck long enough to build stability. What I didn't know was that she'd been covering rent gaps, credit card payments, insurance premiums. Quietly, when she died, it wasn't just grief. It was financial exposure. Collection agencies didn't wait. They started calling within days. One even showed up in person looking for repayment on a personal loan she'd co-signed. My nephew told me he thought they were exaggerating until they taped a notice to the door. I stepped in because someone had to. I paid off immediate threats, cleared high-interest debt, negotiated settlements, moved one of them into a smaller place under his own name so he wouldn't keep getting chased for obligations that weren't his. At first, I framed it as temporary support, but months passed and I kept thinking about what would happen if I died tomorrow. My stepchildren are financially comfortable. One owns investment property. The other works in corporate management with stock options and bonuses. They are not scrambling to cover utilities. They are not dodging collection calls. My nephews were starting from below zero. My estate isn't just savings. The business itself would be the major asset. If sold, it could generate enough to shift someone's future permanently. If managed correctly, it could provide steady income for decades. If inherited by someone who doesn't care about it, it could be dismantled quickly for liquidation value. That's when the idea of changing my will started to take shape. The complication is that my wife is financially entangled in the company, not as an owner, but through expansion loans we secured 3 years ago. She signed personal guarantees tied to our shared assets. That means any major structural change affects her risk exposure. So before I said anything to her, I spoke to an attorney, not to file paperwork, just to understand what it would involve, what could be protected, what could backfire. When I finally told her I was considering amending the will so the business and majority of my estate would go to my nephews, she didn't react quietly. She stared at me for a full 10 seconds like she thought I was joking. Then she said, "You can't be serious." I said I was. She asked when I decided this. I told her I'd been thinking about it for months. She demanded to know why she was just hearing about it. I told her I needed clarity before starting a fight I knew was coming. That's when the temperature shifted. She said her children had always been part of the plan. I said plans can change. She said I was punishing them for being successful. I said this wasn't about punishment. It was about direction. She said I was rewriting our marriage without her consent. I said inheritance isn't a joint vote. Her voice rose first. Mine followed. She accused me of trying to buy loyalty from my nephews. I told her that at least they call me without scheduling it around convenience. She snapped back that I was resentful because her kids never treated me like their father. I said I never asked to be their father, but I didn't expect to be treated like an ATM either. That's when she started yelling, not controlled anger, full volume. She said I was selfish. I said she was calculating. She said I was emotionally unstable from grief. I told her she was panicking because money she assumed was guaranteed might not be. She slammed a door hard enough to rattle the hallway frames. After that night, things didn't cool down. They metastasized. Her daughter stopped responding to my messages entirely. Her son switched from casual conversation to stiff, formal language like he was addressing a client. My wife began asking detailed questions about ownership structure, share transfers, debt ratios, questions she'd never shown interest in before. Then I found out her daughter had posted something on Facebook about men who forget who stood beside them when they were rebuilding. No names, but it didn't take a detective to connect it to me. Employees of mine follow her. Clients follow her. I called her directly. I asked why she was airing private disputes publicly. She said she never mentioned me. I told her the implication was obvious. She said if I felt exposed, maybe I should examine that. I told her to stop being clever and say what she meant. She said she meant that some people change once they feel powerful. I told her she was weaponizing social media because she didn't like that she wasn't automatically inheriting something. She yelled that I was disgusting for reducing family to assets. I yelled back that she was the one who turned it into an online narrative. She called me bitter. I called her entitled. She hung up mid-sentence. My wife confronted me that night about calling her. She said I had no right to attack her daughter. I said I had every right to defend myself. She said I was escalating things deliberately. I said her daughter lit the match first. She said I could have ignored it. I said I'm not going to let someone publicly imply I'm abandoning family. She said, you are. I said no. I'm choosing where what I built goes. We were shouting again.
Hold on tight. Before I share the full story, tap that like, subscribe, and let's talk in the comments. Would you have done the same thing?
At one point she said, you're blowing up this marriage over two grown men who can't get their lives together. I told her to stop talking about my nephews like they were freeloaders. She said that's exactly what they were becoming. I said that was a cheap insult, and she knew it. She accused me of caring more about blood than partnership. I told her partnership doesn't mean automatic control over everything I created before we met. The next escalation came unexpectedly. Her son showed up at my office one afternoon without calling. He asked to speak privately. I agreed. He came in with printed documents, financial projections, hypothetical inheritance splits, buyout clauses. It felt like a hostile board meeting. He said we needed to find a compromise that protected their stake. I told him they don't have a stake. He said they were always told they would inherit equally. I said I never signed a contract promising that. He said I was destabilizing generational planning. I laughed at that phrase. He didn't. He said I was being reckless and short-sighted. I said he was being opportunistic. He said I was making decisions out of guilt. I said he was making arguments out of expectation. Then his voice rose. He said I was about to fracture a family permanently. I told him the family felt fractured the moment inheritance became a negotiation table topic. He accused my nephews of manipulating me. That's when I stood up. I told him to be careful about how he spoke about them. He said he was just being honest. I told him honesty doesn't mean inventing motives. He said I was blind. I said he was threatened. He knocked his chair back when he stood and told me I was going to regret this. I told him regret works both ways. After that, the house turned into a pressure chamber. My wife stopped sleeping in the same room some nights. Not dramatically, just quietly moved things. She started talking about financial independence in abstract terms. She said she needed to protect herself. I said from what? She said from instability I was creating. Every conversation circles back to money, control, loyalty. Words like betrayal and abandonment get thrown around. I've been called selfish, reckless, manipulative, prideful. I've fired back that they're entitled, presumptive, and treating my death like a scheduled payout. No paperwork has been filed yet. Update 1. My stepdaughter didn't tag me, didn't use my name, but she wrote a long caption about men who rebuild on the backs of others and forget who held them up. She talked about loyalty being repaid with erasure and watching greed replace gratitude in real time. People in the comments were asking if she was okay. She replied with things like, you really see someone when money enters the picture. Employees follow her. Vendors follow her. One of my long-term clients screenshotted it and sent it to me with a, is everything alright over there? message. That's when it stopped being a private family issue. I called her immediately. I didn't start calm. I said, take it down. She said, excuse me. I told her she knew exactly what she was doing. She said she never mentioned me. I said she didn't need to. Anyone with half a brain could connect the dots. She said if I felt exposed, maybe that meant I had something to feel exposed about. That line pushed me over the edge. I told her she was playing games with my professional reputation because she didn't like that I wasn't handing sending her a future payout. She snapped back that I was paranoid and obsessed with image. I said this wasn't about image. It was about dragging my name into something publicly when she doesn't understand the consequences. She said, the only consequence is you don't get to rewrite history. I asked her what history I was rewriting. She said the part where her mother supported me emotionally while I rebuilt. I told her emotional support doesn't equal ownership. She said that's exactly the problem, that I reduce everything to ownership and assets. That's when we both started yelling, not raised voices, yelling. She said I never truly accepted her or her brother. I told her acceptance doesn't mean automatic inheritance. She said I was cold and transactional. I said she was entitled and self-righteous. She said I sounded bitter. I said she sounded spoiled and disconnected from reality. She told me I was proving her point in real time. I told her she was proving mine by turning a private disagreement into a public narrative. She hung up and blocked my number before I finished the sentence. I thought that would be the peak for the week. It wasn't. My wife found out I had called her daughter because her daughter immediately called her. When I walked in that night, my wife was already angry. Not simmering. Angry. She asked why I was harassing her child. I told her asking someone to stop publicly implying I'm some kind of villain isn't harassment. She said I embarrassed her. I said her daughter embarrassed me first. She said I should have been the bigger person. I said I'm not going to sit quietly while someone paints me as a greedy old man who forgot his family. She said, that's how you're acting. I said, no, that's how you're choosing to see it. She accused me of trying to isolate her from her kids. I laughed at that because it was so backwards. I said, if anything, they're trying to corner me into keeping the will the way they want. She said I was paranoid and combative. I said she was defensive because she knew they were out of line. That argument went in circles for hours. At one point she said, you're throwing away 7 years for 2 men who have never even built anything. I told her to stop diminishing my nephews. She said I was risking our financial security to prop up grown adults. I said I was redirecting what I built, not dismantling it. Then I said something I probably shouldn't have, but I was furious. I said the company existed before the marriage and would exist after it. She went silent for about 3 seconds and then exploded. She said that was the clearest sign yet that I don't see this as a partnership. She said I was revealing that I think of everything as mine and everyone else as temporary. I said she was twisting my words. She said I wasn't twisting anything. I was just finally saying what I've always thought. We were both shouting so loud, I'm surprised neighbors didn't call someone. The next escalation came from a direction I didn't expect. One of my managers pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home because he'd gotten a weird message on LinkedIn from my stepson asking, hypothetically, what would happen to the company if ownership changed unexpectedly? He forwarded it to me. I confronted my stepson about that. He didn't deny it. He said he was doing due diligence because if I was planning to hand control to inexperienced relatives, he needed to understand exposure. I told him he had no authority to conduct due diligence on my company. He said if his mother's financial security was tied to it, he absolutely did. That's when he asked to meet in person. He came to my office with spreadsheets, not suggestions, actual models.
Hold on tight. Before I share the full story, tap that like, subscribe, and let's talk in the comments. Would you have done the same thing?
Different scenarios for how the business could be split, how shares could be allocated between him, his sister, and my nephews to avoid destabilization. He spoke like he was presenting to investors. I let him finish. Then I said, you're assuming you're entitled to any percentage. He said he was assuming fairness. I said fairness doesn't mean equal slices regardless of context. He said context doesn't erase expectations that were set years ago. I told him I never signed a binding contract promising anything. He accused me of moving goalposts. I accused him of building plans around money that isn't his. He said I was acting impulsively because of grief. I said he was acting strategically because of inheritance. He said I was being reckless and emotional. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the irony was absurd. That made him furious. He said my nephews don't have the discipline to run a company. I said you don't need to run it yourself to inherit it. He said that's naive. I said what's naive is assuming you understand operations when you've never stepped inside the warehouse floor without checking your phone. He told me I was disrespectful. I told him he was presumptuous. He said, you're blowing up a stable future for everyone. I said, you're panicking because the future you counted on isn't guaranteed. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly across the floor. He said I was destroying trust and acting like a tyrant. I said trust doesn't mean compliance. He left without shaking my hand. hand. Since then, the house has become almost unrecognizable. My wife started meeting with a financial advisor without telling me. I found out because I saw a folder on the kitchen table with printed statements and asset summaries I hadn't gathered. When I asked her about it, she said she was preparing for contingencies. I asked what contingencies. She said instability. I said, you mean me? She didn't deny it. Update 2. 3 weeks ago, I got a formal notice requesting clarification on ownership structure because someone had inquired about the survivorship terms on one of our expansion loans. The language was careful, but the message was clear. Someone had triggered a review. I already knew who. When I confronted my wife, she didn't deny it. She said she had every right to understand her exposure if I was planning to hand the company to outsiders. I told her calling a lender without telling me wasn't understanding exposure. It was destabilizing a contract. She said if the foundation was solid, a phone call wouldn't shake it. That argument was different from the others. It wasn't emotional at first. It was sharp, direct. I said, you're playing with something that feeds both of us. She said, you started this. I said, no, I started a will discussion. You escalated it into financial warfare. That's when the volume went up again. She accused me of forcing her into defensive action. I told her defense doesn't involve poking lenders. She said I left her no choice. I said she had choices. She just didn't like them. Then she said something that changed the tone completely. She said, if you think you can cut my children out and still expect me to stand here quietly, you're delusional. I told her I wasn't asking her to stand quietly. I was asking her not to undermine the company. She said the company stopped being neutral the second I tried to redirect it. The next day, her son requested a meeting with me and 2 of my senior managers. Not casually, formally. He framed it as addressing concerns about continuity. I shouldn't have agreed, but I did. We sat in the conference room. He brought printed summaries again, but this time it wasn't just inheritance hypotheticals. He had calculated what would happen if my wife withdrew her guarantees, what refinancing would cost, what penalties might trigger. He laid it out like he was presenting weaknesses. One of my managers looked at me like he didn't know what was happening anymore. I stopped the presentation halfway through. I said, you don't work here. He said, my mother's name is tied to this. I said, not in the way you think. He said I was being evasive. I said he was overstepping. He accused me, in front of my own employees, of running the company like a personal kingdom. That's when I stood up. I told him this isn't a boardroom takeover scenario. This is a family dispute you're trying to convert into leverage. He said if I hadn't blindsided everyone, there wouldn't be leverage to use. I said, you're not entitled to anything I built. He said, you're proving exactly why this business needs structure beyond you. That was the first time I felt something shift internally. Not anger, not defensiveness, clarity. After that meeting, I called my attorney, not to ask questions, to act. Within days, I restructured ownership into a trust that isolates operational control from marital guarantees. It required refinancing, yes. It required absorbing penalties, yes. It required long conversations with lenders and a higher interest rate on one facility. I signed them anyway. It was expensive. It was messy, but it severed the pressure point. When I told my wife what I'd done, she went pale first, then furious. She said I made a unilateral decision that affects her risk profile. I said she already forced that path when she triggered lender reviews. She said I cut her out of the loop deliberately. I said she stepped out of the loop when she started moving behind my back. Then it became shouting again, the loudest it's ever been. She said I was power hungry. I said she was trying to corner me financially. She said I was destroying the marriage to win an argument. I said this stopped being an argument when it turned into strategic interference. She said I chose my nephews over her. I said I chose autonomy over pressure. She told me I was arrogant and incapable of compromise. I told her compromise doesn't mean surrender. Then she said very clearly, if you sign that will, I'm done. I told her it was already signed. That was the full showdown. Not dramatic theatrics, not thrown objects, just silence that lasted several seconds, and then her saying, then we're finished. No screaming after that, just cold finality. Her daughter sent me a long message that night calling me controlling, vindictive, and small. I replied once, your assumptions were never agreements. Then I muted the thread. Her son sent a shorter one, you'll regret isolating yourself. I didn't respond. My wife has started speaking to her own attorney. We haven't filed anything yet, but the conversations are no longer hypothetical. Assets are being itemized, timelines discussed. The company remains intact. Operational control is locked. The will leaves the majority to my nephews with specific conditions about management continuity. It's done. The end. You built a solid company from the ashes of ruin. Your stepkids are already set. Property, bonuses, careers. Your nephews were actually fucked financially after their mom died. You quietly decided to redirect your legacy to the people who need it instead of the ones who expect it. They responded by vague posting you on FB to your clients, / employees showing up at your office with spreadsheets. Like mini corporate raiders, your stepson mang your managers. On LinkedIn, wife secretly calling lenders to rattle your loans you didn't fold. You restructured the company, ate the cost, locked it down, and signed the new will. Wife threatened divorce. You said, okay, that's not selfish. That's refusing to let entitled adults blackmail you with marriage over money you earned before you even met them. NTA, you protected what you built instead of letting them weaponize family to claim it. Respect. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.